you. And we're now going to go back to our aim statements and work through the QI process. So today we'll work on the analyze part. Yesterday we looked at the aim statement and building that and how do you identify a problem. So today we'll work on making a cause and effect analysis and process flow. So cause and effect analysis is all about looking at the root causes. And oftentimes we call it a fishbone diagram, which, because it kind of looks, it's an idea generating exercise that looks like a fishbone. So I like to say I know, because this is something that my sister would say when she was little and would just assume, she knew everything, didn't need to know anything else. She knew what was going on, she knew why it was happening, and she knew the solution, which was not exactly always true, but oftentimes people think they know the problem and they think they know how to fix it. And that is oftentimes a huge issue, and people make these broad sweeping decisions on how to improve something, and that actually sometimes makes the problem worse or creates other problems. So people think they know the main problem and they think they know the solution. And oftentimes what happens is it's also individual focus, not process focus, like we talked about yesterday. People think, oh, this whole system's not working because the nurses aren't doing their jobs. And we'll just tell them to do jobs and we'll have new guidelines and it'll fix everything. And then it doesn't happen, and it doesn't make anything better, and it oftentimes leads to morale issues and everything. So that's why successful improvement efforts focuses on the why the problem is occurring and really thinking about the underlying processes. And this whole thing, we do it with the team for the quality improvement process. So that's why thinking about who is in your team is really important when you're thinking about the issue you're working with. So understanding root causes. It's, again, you're trying to identify why the process isn't working efficiently. In each of your aim statement, there's a gap. So what is the gap that you're working on? And that goes into that top of the fish. So usually the head portion is what is lacking? What is not happening that you want to happen? If there's not enough equity in or representation of women in higher education, maybe that's the gap. And then the body of your fish or the bones are, what are the reasons that this is not happening? And so we generally separate the bones of the fish with people, procedure, equipment, environment, so that it helps us tease out the issues and really think about why something is happening and makes us step back and not jump straight to the solution or straight to, oh, we know why exactly this is happening. And again, if you're thinking about the fact that in your interdisciplinary team, you'll have different people with different ideas on what these causes are, and this will lead us to really have a really constructive brainstorming session where everyone's ideas get heard. So what is a cause and effect diagram or a fishbone diagram? It's a visual diagram that it's oftentimes represented as a fish, and the head indicates the particular problem that you're analyzing, and the bones of the fish represent potential causes. And it identifies activities that contribute to the end product, and you can categorize causes to help focus your improvement efforts. And again, it's also a place where you might have 10 different ideas that could potentially impact this quality gap that you're talking about. And that might be something that if you'll address a couple of them now, and maybe in the next cycle of your PDSA, you'll address another portion of it. So this just gives you ideas, and it's for improving quality. So to use a fishbone diagram, you first want to take your aim statement and identify what your quality gap is. And the whole point is that this is a mapping of hypotheses. This is not all the answers, and it doesn't have to be, well, these are exactly the things. And you can map out, well, we think this problem is happening because there aren't enough supplies, or people are working too many long hours. And a lot of this you need to go back and research because you don't have the information in front of you. But at the same time, it helps to lay out all the different reasons you think something is happening. And then also, everyone sees what everyone sees. So no one's idea is more important or more correct than other people's. So it also gives value to people's voices that aren't always heard in meetings or in decision making. So before making a fishbone diagram, you want to express the problem as a gap between what is happening and what should happen. So what is the quality gap you're looking at? So it's kind of looking at your aim statement and just retooling it a little bit in that quality gap. And then we're going to think about all the causes that might be causing this quality gap. So process starts with first knowing how to brainstorm. And it seems like a pretty easy thing, brainstorming. We all do that, right? But we don't always brainstorm with a large group, and we don't always brainstorm with people we don't know. So this is also the reason that group activities when we're in school is sometimes can be really difficult, is there'll always be one person's voice which will be the loudest, and so this is a place where we give respect to everyone in the team and really make sure that their ideas are being recorded. And even if you think that's a silly idea or that can't possibly be the reason, that this allows for a space for that to be put and validated in a certain way so that you can put it down. It might later on you find out that that's not actually a valid cause for the problem, but at least it's there. And they feel like their voices have been heard. So successful brainstorming encourages creativity, involves everyone, and generates excitement, energy, and also separates people from ideas that they suggest so that they are more open to other things, so they're not stuck in that I know exactly what the problem is and I know exactly how to solve it. So when you have more ideas, then maybe it'll allow them to step back, be like, okay, maybe it's a little more complicated, or maybe there's more than one reason that this is happening. So we always say that you should ask why 5 times. So if you're saying that there is problems with vaccines or people not taking vaccines, so you ask why. Well, they're not coming to the clinic. Why? Is it too far away? Or then you ask why, so you really get to the bottom of that cause. So this lays out one issue of poor quality of care. So why is there's a lack of coordination between different levels of health system, and this is in the policy line, and poor referral system. Why? There's might be overcrowding in the emergency department, and you can say, okay, why is there overcrowding? Are there not enough beds, or are people not being triaged well? Why? Is it because there's not enough training? So it allows us to really dig into the issue and get to the bottom of some of these causes. And so let's see. And this is just another example of fishbone. Another thing is these are really nice and neat. A fishbone diagram, when you do it in a group, is never going to look nice and neat. The whole point is that there are a lot of ideas. It's really messy, and because that's how ideas are generated. So we're going to do a fishbone diagram, and this is to help practice so that when you go to your settings and conduct this, you kind of know how to do that. And so the first thing we're going to do is describe the gap between the actual and desired outcomes, and then separate your bones out to processes, equipment, people, material, environment. So it also helps us think about, okay, we have this one problem we're looking at. What are some of the environmental causes? It might be there's not enough room in the hospital. There are not enough different rooms. There's no, if you're talking about TB, say, there's no isolation rooms. So what are the things you're looking at? And then for each of these problems or categories, you want to ask why 5 times so that you're ensuring that you're getting to the root causes. And these last 3 steps are, I think, some of the most important is when you come across something that needs to be checked with data, to underline it so that you can go back and look at it. You can, if you say the staff is working too many hours, do you need to check that? Or maybe there's no baseline report. Do you need to check that? And then what are your constraints? What can't you change at all? Maybe you can't change the national policy. Not yet, maybe later. But what can't you change? Maybe you can't change how big your hospital is. Maybe you can't change certain things. So what are things that you're not that are just how it is to a certain point? Maybe the building, maybe you can't change your geography. And so you have to work around that. So, and what causes can you have an impact on? So things that you can change, you could probably change the communication between the different departments. You can change the meetings that people have. You can change other things. So what are things that you can change? Would be, you circle them. Constraints, you put it in parentheses and underline things that you want to check in data. Again, helps us categorize all of our ideas. So next, we're just going to go in our groups and work on making a fishbone for our aim statement. And I'll go around and help you with anything you have questions with. Any questions, because I went through that pretty fast, but I think the group work is the most important on this. So the next thing, how did the fishbone diagram go, first of all? Good? Was it helpful? Okay, good. And you can see how when you are in the more interdisciplinary team where more ideas would be generated, and it would be a good way to get everyone involved. So another way of analyzing the problem is looking at the process, to look at what is really happening now. And this is, we do it through flowcharting. And we talked about how process is a sequence of steps through which inputs from suppliers are converted into output for customers. So this, we're saying suppliers as, depending on what your challenge is or what your quality gap is, could be the clinic, the hospital, and the customer would be the patient. And the system is the sum of all the elements, including the processes that interact together towards producing a common goal. So if your common goal is to cure a patient, it is to make sure you're screening for certain things, what are the different systems that have to align to do that? So flowcharting, again, what is flowcharting? It's a powerful tool for understanding processes as they are and communicating how they should be. A lot of these tools are simple, but they are really powerful. A fishbone diagram is very simple, but it can do a lot. Just because something is helpful doesn't mean it has to be this super complicated thing. And flowcharting breaks down the process into individual events and activities so you can really see what's going on. And you can have a visual map showing the logical relationships between them. So this is just a simple example of a flow chart. So you have a distinctive start and end point, and oftentimes it can be the hardest thing to do is if you're making a flow chart, figuring out what your start point is and what your end point is. So if you're looking at C. diff, is it looking at when a patient comes in? Or is it when they're diagnosed? And is your end point when they leave the hospital or when that C. diff is cleared? So flowcharting to understand the actual process, again, reiterating, developing common understanding of the situation so everyone is in the same page on what is actually happening. And this is also a key place where you pinpoint problems. So people think they know what's going on, and as they map it out and they write it out, and a nurse is like, no, that's not what we do. So then you realize what some of these huge places of misunderstanding or miscommunication or things falling behind are. And it helps resolve ambiguity and make improvement, again, just adding to that QI process, and can help in reaching a common approach for solving issues. Final flowchart, which should describe the process clearly, can be used to communicate to others. So if you have a flowchart of how your system or your clinic or a process should work, and having that visually, as Lori said, in someone had the qualities, the dimensions of quality visually put. I have a flow chart of certain things that I have to do, so I know exactly when they have to be done. It's just a helpful reminder. And also, if you're only in charge of one step of the process, say you're the intern making the 50,000 copies of the triage form, it helps to know that you're part of that bigger system. Again, going towards the culture of quality, that you're part of a bigger thing and that what you do matters. So to create a flow chart or process flow chart, you decide on the beginning and end point of the process to be flow charted. Identify the different steps in the process, link the steps with arrows showing the directions that it goes, and then review the draft to see whether the steps are in the logical order. Sounds simple enough? So oftentimes there are 3 versions of a process. What is thought to be happening, and what is actually happening, and what it should be happening. So this is why flowcharting can be so powerful, is because it really helps to show and visually show what some of these gaps are and why your system isn't working. So some of the symbols that we use, again, this can change. This is just what we're using, but you have a start and end point. It can be a green circle or an oval, and then for every step where there's a process step or an activity or a decision is being made, you have different symbols so that okay, is this a diagnosis point? Are you deciding to readmit the patient? Are you letting them go home? And the direction of the flow of where the next step is. So this is an example of going back to the aim statement example. Okay, so of I think this is the hemorrhage, and whether to decide how to deal with that is a woman arrives in labor, and what does she do next? Is she goes in to the reception area, and then next she's evaluated. And any place that you don't exactly know what happens, you can put in a cloud or a bubble. So because that might be something you need to look at, is someone is monitoring labor, but you don't know how often. How is it hourly? Is it does the intensity or the periodicity change depending on how close she is to giving birth? And then what kind of delivery care is going on? So you don't have to know everything to make a flow chart. You can put things that you kind of vaguely think this is going on in clouds so that you can go back and look at the problem. But this helps us map out what's going on. And then there's the end point is discharge. So the starting and end points are really important, and then filling in the middle portions. And so another example on immunization, this is, I believe it's in your workbook if you want to look at it more, but you can, whether or not someone a decision is made, you can say yes or no, and that changes your flow. So there can be decision points, and then if you're screening for TB and what the test says, did they get the results, yes or no? Are they following up? Then follows a different path. So you can lay it all out and kind of see what happens. So tips for doing a process mapping, you want to make sure you think about where the process begins and ends. And like I said, sometimes this can be the hardest thing to decide. And then list the steps from the start to the finish and asking, okay, what happens first, then what happens, and then what happens. So we make sure we go through each step. And then, like I said, you don't have to map out everything. So if you're talking about C. diff and you're saying, okay, the diagnosis process, but you don't have to map out every single decision a doctor has to make. That could be a separate flowchart later on that's very clinically focused. But if you're thinking about more of the hospital system, how are you mapping that out? And then turn the list of steps from each of these into start to decision points or next step in the boxes, and then also directionality. So if they go from one place to the next.